Hi there, this is Tim Gunther from PowerDMS. First, I want to extend a thank you out to all you who have registered for this educational webinar event. I am glad to provide this webinar along with a series that we're doing. This is one of a 5-part series that Eric Daigle has agreed to partner with us on. The other webinars that will be happening will be at the end of the presentation. We'll talk about dates. We are doing this one as complimentary. The other ones, there is a fee to attend the webinar, and if you choose to attend, there will be an email sent out talking about that. Well, we have a great relationship with Eric Daigle. We've partnered with him for over the last 2 years, and we work with him throughout the country. I think some of those that have met him will enjoy what you're about to see and hear. So I'm going to turn this over to Eric, and thank you for attending. Now, this session is being recorded. If you do have questions, you are on mute, so please use the chat window off to the right and write your question. Eric and I will try to answer them as best we can. Those that we don't get to, we will follow up after the webinar has been done. So Eric, the floor is yours.
Wait, you didn't tell me I was going to have homework, Tim. So I'd like to welcome everybody and thank everybody very much for their time this afternoon. I know you're all very busy, and that is why we thought that the webinar would be the best series in order to handle this for you. Now, those of you that know me know that a couple things. First, technology and I go hand in hand as to not at all, and therefore I hope I don't break the webinar on the way of trying to run it. I'm going to try to give you in a very concise and applicable process my views and visions on policy development and where I get those from, which I think is very important, because it's not something that I've designed along the way. I'd like to definitely thank PowerDMS, Tim, and the team that are out there working behind the scenes on this. They really got it done, and I really appreciate our relationship. My relationship with them is very simple. A lot of you know that I do projects all across the country, and when departments get to certain sizes, the ability to track policies and conduct training online is something that's very necessary, specifically for the legal aspect, and that is we oftentimes have to prove in court that we have distributed a policy, that an officer or an employee has received the policy, and also that they understood the policy. So, over the years, my beginning to use PowerDMS was that I could put a policy in there, I could send it out to the troops, they could review it, I could document that, I could also give them a test, and I could progress along, and I was able to produce empirical evidence to support that. So I welcome everybody to this. Now, just to start out so we're all on the same page, first part and foremost, everybody said, well, the announcement went out as legally defensible and, effective and constitutional police policies. So I want to make sure that you understand majority of what I'm talking about and the topics that we'll talk about, for the most part, have a police orientation to them. But I do know that a lot of my clients also are involved in the correctional and also in the municipal operations field. So if you're broad-reaching enough and you're on board, at least for the first minute, and we'll start watching the numbers as to how many of you dump out after this statement. But the reality is, while private companies and businesses definitely have policies that run, and they still supply the same way, the methodology of which we're going to talk about today is the legally defensible policy for a municipal entity, which majority of the focus is on law enforcement, but is no different whether it's law enforcement, corrections, whether it's fire department, or whether it has some unique aspect of a municipal operation. This is not something that's specific to law enforcement. So let's start off with, and one of the things that's going to be very interesting for me is that I'm used, those of you that know me know, I really like my interaction with the crowd. So because I can't interact with the crowd in this, I guess you're just going to have to all listen to me talk. And those of you that know me out there, I looked at the list, I know who you are. You know that I can hear myself. I got no problem talking to myself either. So that's not a problem. So let's get right down to what we're doing here, because your time is valuable, and I want to make sure that you are getting what you need out of this. So the scope of today's presentation is really a little bit about why do we need defensible policies, how do we get to defensible policies, and really one of my best recommendations is what I could give you for the department who doesn't have the ability to pay outside entities to come in and write policies for them. My goal is to give you some tools and some tools in your toolbox that you can utilize to go out and look at how to write these. I think everybody who's on board right now can agree with one thing. Policy producing, policy development, policy writing, it's not an easy thing. It's a very difficult thing. But the one thing that we can do to help ourselves is we can ensure that we are getting the beginning portions of developing policies from areas in where we are legally sound. And that is, where do I pull, if you look at me and say, Eric, where do I pull this information from to make that good policy which will survive the courtroom? Now, we start out by saying, listen, my goal is to give you legally defensible policies. And you know what? Everybody of us online, if we were having a discussion, could discuss and argue in different parts of this country what a real good policy looks like and what you'd like to see. So what I'm giving you is obviously the philosophy of myself. I'm working on these projects across the country, working in projects where Department of Justice is evaluating my policies, but also after about 12 years of doing litigation work, I guess I'm just very simply going to say I'm sick of eating bad policies. I'm sick of standing in the courtroom and trying to defend a bad policy. So how important are policies? Well, if you've seen me teach anywhere in the country, you know one thing, and that is all over the country for the past few years, my mission has been the same. When the economy started to cut your budgets and you started to reduce your training budgets and your operations budgets, you had to start laying off employees. The one thing the police chief said to me consistently from that point on is, Eric, listen, tell me how, with a lowered budget, with less, how do I protect my agency? And the mission that I would tell them across the country was just the same. My mission was, even though your budget is cut, even though your money is less, even though your town council, your finance department is giving you less, your legal obligation doesn't change. And therefore, we still have an obligation to ensure we are meeting what we call the Monell standard of liability. And we're going to get into that so you understand it. And really, so you know, the first about third of this presentation is going to be kind of the reason why. Why do I need these policies? And give me some help on to where I look for them. And then we're going to talk about, at the last portion of this, so it's why do I need them? Where do I get them from? And finally, what's your recommendations to make a good policy? And that's what I hope to do over the next 50 minutes. When talking to Tim and PowerDMS, one of the things I wanted to do is, and I again appreciate the floor that they've given me for this, is that a lot of you across the country might not have the financial ability to bring in consultants like ourselves to do policy and procedure review, and therefore I don't believe that means you should be less vulnerable. So this was a methodology in the way we're going to progress by doing webinars on topics, on policy topics in the future, is hopefully a way in which you can check yourself on these high liability, high frequency policies if you just don't have the financial ability to bring in an expert or a consultant to help you. Now let's start with the overall. Reality is none of you in any of your jobs, except maybe some of your you accreditation managers, not very many people are hired for the purpose of writing policies. I always joke with my officers and my command staff that none of them went across the stage on graduation and was so excited about their ability to finally be able to write policies. They were so excited for that. Reality is if you have someone in your agency that's that excited about policies, that might be a little concerning. We might call that a clue. So let's talk about why. Well, in the litigation world, you understand that when most agencies are sued, municipality for fire, corrections, police, normally in all allegations, one of the first exhibits or one of the key pieces of evidence in a litigation is going to be your department policy. And the reason why it's going to be your department policy is because the policy sets the standard for which your agency tells their employees how to do their job. Now, I think that this has progressively increased over the years, and maybe it's because I'm just really sick of eating bad policies. We've started to work out areas where agencies are enhancing or developing their policies a little more. Now, I know a lot of you out there are in the accreditation world, and I give you a lot of credit for the accreditation world because it's a lot of work, and I definitely am supportive of an accreditation process because it has some very distinct benefits. But the one thing that I've come to learn in my involvement in projects where Department of Justice has done investigations into departments is that accreditation in the litigation world, while it's a good thing, it's not a win-all. It's not a save-all. In fact, in my opinion, there is a distinct separation between accreditation and constitutional-based policing. Accreditation has never said we're going to protect you from all liability. You know, my understanding is they've said, listen, we're going to help you make your departments better and more defensible. So we still have a little bit more to go. I know for you guys in the accreditation world, I apologize because some of you have sat in front of me and with frustrated faces when we're there doing a use of force investigation, and the agency looks at me and says, Eric, I don't know why you're here. You shouldn't be here. We're accredited. And I said, well, Chief, accreditation didn't solve the rest of the use of force issues. What are we trying to do? One thing. In 2014, the mission of law enforcement is to limit inconsistencies. The mission of all municipal operations, corrections, fire, police, is to limit inconsistent practices. That is, there are just certain things in this world, especially in the law enforcement side, that we should all be doing the same way. We should all, and for example, high liability, high frequency policies, use of force, we should all be doing it the same way. We should all reporting it the same way. All our policies should look consistent. Internal affairs, accepting complaints, bias-based policing, ADA regulations, off-duty policies, all of our weapons, from impact weapons to chemical agent to electronic control weapon to officer-involved shootings to force investigation by supervisors. This, in order to ensure that we are operating efficiently and effectively, we all need to be as close to consistent as we can get. So if you buy that, and of course I only have about 3 minutes to prove it to you, if you buy that, then I need to give you the tools to move your policies towards consistency with the understanding that consistency will better your legal cases. So what are we doing? Well, we're looking for professional practices. And in the law enforcement world, we're looking for professional police practices. More importantly, there's just something that frustrates me as I look at police departments across the country. And those of you that have heard me speak in different areas know I'm very direct on this. There's times where I go into a police department to ask questions. And the question is very simple. Why do we do what we're doing? Why do we do certain things? And unfortunately, whether it's corrections, fire, police, there are times where you as the administrators look at me and say, you know, Eric, I'm not really sure. I think we do this because that's the way we've always done it. And therefore, why would we do it any differently? That's how we were taught to do it. That's how we learned to do it. And you know what? We've never looked at any other way of doing it. So now to make you...
Hey, Eric.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, there was a question that came up. I'm trying to review those that I think are relative to what you're talking about. So there was a question that came up about if we follow accreditation protocol, how is it your recommendation going to protect us from liability?
Well, as I said early on, it's the accreditation protocol, I think, is about a 2/3 of the way there. The area of of, and I'm really focusing in this area not on the accreditation processes with making sure you have the right building codes and fire extinguishers and equipment in your car, really, because, I'll be honest with you, while I work around agencies that are accredited, I can in no way become an expert. I use a lot of consultants in my teams that are experts in accreditation to make sure my agency protects themselves. I'm really worried about the policy aspect of where accreditation says you should have a policy in this. And more importantly, while they say you should have a policy in this, I want to take you to the next level and say, what does that policy have to say? And oftentimes in the accreditation arena, they're very prescriptive on certain areas and not prescriptive on areas where we could use just to be a little more prescriptive. All right? Keep those questions coming if you want. I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. It gives me a chance to breathe, too. You guys, the questions will be like, Eric, you slow down. But I gotta get it all out.
You're good.
So, and thank you for that, Tim. So let's look outside of our operations. Let's talk about methodology, application, process of policy drafting. Well, let's start with the mission statement. And the mission statement that I use, and I know there's going to be a couple second delay in the slide that you get as I'm out here representing the wonderful state of Kansas today. But the mission statement that you should see on your screen is that DOJ has put in some of their consent decrees this language, which I like. Policies and procedures shall reflect and express the department's core values and priorities and provide clear direction to ensure that officers lawfully, effectively, and ethically carry out their law enforcement responsibilities. The reality and what I'd like to add to this is that we need to focus on why we're writing these policies. One of my mentors, Chief Charlie Reynolds, will always tell you, let's not forget who we're writing these policies for, people. Let's not forget that the cops on the street, the firemen, the corrections guys on the line have to be able to read these policies and know what they're allowed or not allowed to do. And sometimes when the guy in the corner office or the lady in the corner office produces the policy, there's times where I read it and say, hey, what does this mean? I don't understand it. And I'll tell you, if I don't understand it, I guarantee your cops don't understand it. So let's make sure that we are getting it. I am of the mentality today that more is better. I am not an old school policy guy, which often is, hey, let's write a use of force policy in one sentence that says, please use force reasonably. Well, that's good, and you know what? We've seen it for many years. But really, in 2014, do you really think that's going to win the day? Do you think we're going to survive that? And the answer is no. Well, in the reality, my other philosophy that you're going to get is that reality is I don't believe that agencies can get a cookie-cutter policy. In fact, one of the missions of the Daigle Policy Center is that we work closely with departments, because there are certain things that I will say are the important core, whether it's case law that I'll show you, whether it's DOJ standards, whether it's even some accreditation standards. There's some things that I'm going to say, listen, you got to have this in your policy. But the reality is why I can't give you a cookie-cutter policy is because you need to make it work for your agency. You need to make it, whether it's 10 cops or 15,000 cops, you got to make sure that your agency can get the job done. And that's the issue that we want to ensure. So let's transition to the why. And the why is very simply, the thing that we defend, the area of law in which we defend policies on, stems from an agency of law called agency liability, or Monell liability, or even more importantly, the name of the case, which is Monell versus Department of Social Services. The scary part is that I go across the country as a litigator, there's police chiefs and operators, municipal operators and managers who don't understand this case. And if I was to look at you and say, this case is the most important stem of ensuring liability protection, you'd think by 2014 that we would know that. And you know what? I take responsibility for that. And what I do with my clients is the first thing that I do is make sure they understand the why. Why am I forcing my cops, my officers, my firefighters to review policies, to sit for hours of training? Why do I want my supervisors to supervise? Why do we have effective internal affairs investigation to make sure my cops are following the policies of the department? And the reason why and the motivation that you need to ensure that comes from this case. In fact, the summary of the case, it comes from where female employees in the Department of Social Services and the Board of Education in the City of New York brought an action against the City of New York challenging the policies of those bodies. Well, very simply and very easier to understand is someone, when they were trying to save money in the Department of Social Services in the City of New York, decided that they were going to force females to take unpaid leave when they became pregnant so that when they gave birth, they did not have to pay them their benefits. I guess what amazes me the most about this case is that nobody stood next to the guy who made that decision or the gal who made that decision. There's probably a guy. But the guy who made that decision and said to him, hey, you know, I don't know if that's such a good idea. I don't know if we should do that. So it's not surprising to any of you listening, because you don't need to be a legal scholar to understand that, hey, that doesn't sound like that's constitutionally feasible. But the reason we're at court is not because it was we needed the Supreme Court to decide whether it was constitutionally feasible. It's because the Supreme Court was faced with the City of New York saying, hey, that's a lot of cash we have to now pay the ladies who we didn't pay back then. And so we don't want to do that. And we don't think that we should have to do that. We shouldn't have to pay for the poor decision of a middle manager. And as you can imagine, the United States Supreme Court said, yeah, you do. You're going to pay. They asked a very specific question, and that is, did you have a policy in your department that ensured the protection of constitutional rights for your employees? And what did you clearly articulate that policy? More importantly, what you need to understand as the screen changes in front of you is that the Supreme Court said the action that is alleged to be unconstitutional implements or executes a policy statement, ordinance, regulation, or decision officially adopted and promulgated by that body's officers. Moreover, local governments may be sued for constitutional deprivations visited pursuant to the governmental custom, even though such a custom has not received approval through the department's or the body's decision-making channels. So, yes, we can say that in all litigation, the policy is going to be what's going to be the first order of business. Officer, did you know there was a policy? Officer, did you follow, the policy? And officer, did you understand what the policy said? In all litigation, the number one thing a plaintiff's attorney who sues you needs is, in order to get money, they need a Monell violation. So it's a two-part test. One, the existence of an official policy or custom of such a long-standing to have the force of law, and two, pursuant to which one or more municipal employees violated the plaintiff's civil rights. If they can prove this, which you hopefully will see on your screen now, the two-part test, then there's some success they're going to get. The best way to describe it and show it to you is what is coming onto your screen now, which is what I call the ladder of liability. I don't know if you can see the clicker, but if you can, you will see that I demonstrate and I'm separating the three levels of the ladder of liability. Just picture at the top of this ladder is a bell. And if you're successful, you ring the bell. Well, guess what happens if you ring the bell, ladies and gentlemen? We pay a lot of money. And what you need to understand is the policy writers for your entity is what it takes to ring the bell. And so let's talk about that briefly. The layer on the bottom is the officers. The middle layer is the supervisors. And the top layer is the CEO or the chief executive officer of that entity. Now, what if I was to tell you that working with all agencies, I can ensure that from the layer of sergeants all the way to the top, I can assist you by protecting liability of your agencies. Would you be up for that? And hopefully you're all saying yes. And so let me explain to you how. Very simply, one of the things that we need to do is we need to ensure that the sergeants are the gatekeepers. So I'm going to start from the top where the bell is and work my way down. What is the top here? Well, the CEO in the municipality is responsible for some very simple things: policy, training, supervision, and conducting effective internal affairs investigations, ensuring that if there is a violation of policy, if there is a violation of training, that there is discipline. In fact, the mantra that I like to use is this: if you have a proper policy and you properly trained your staff on that policy, violation of that policy must equal discipline, because if it doesn't, then your whole system has collapsed. Your whole liability protection entity is no longer working. So how do I fix the top? How do you fix the top? Well, at the top, you ensure that you have good, clear prescription policies that guide an agency. The next level is supervisors. The key to all success, in my opinion, as I said earlier on, I've gone around the country in the past couple of years as cops, as agencies, as municipalities have lost their cash. And one of the things that has been the hottest topic is, Eric, tell me how to protect myself with less money. Well, two areas are most important. First is policies. Second is supervision. You put your first chunk of money in your policies, put your second chunk of money and the rest of it in your supervisors. Those of you that are involved in my, you got another one?
Hey, Eric, I had a question.
You can't wave your hands. That's what you don't like, right?
Yeah. The question was, what do you think about removing the force continuum from policy, and what do you recommend to replace it with?
I'm going to push pause on that question, and we're going to deal with that on the backside because that's a very specific. I will tell you very simple so that I don't get accused of the lawyer answer. I am removing my continuum from all my policies, and I replace it with Fourth Amendment constitutional policing. And we will talk about that, and hopefully that will keep you all on till the end of this. How's that?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Can you remind me of that on the end, Tim?
I will.
Okay, very good. So the second area in here is put all your money in your supervisor, and that is if you're involved, if you get my articles, the articles that come out of Daigle Law Group, I know some of my staff is on board. I know Trish is online, and she produces and works with me on a lot of these articles, to give her some credit for that. One of the latest articles we just produced based on my frustration is to tell agencies, listen, you're only as strong as your weakest sergeant, and therefore it's imperative that we ensure our supervisors are enforcing the policies. Realistic, and I'll be honest with you, no matter where your department falls in good, bad, or could be better, nothing is going to change in your department without the enforcement of your officers. What I hate seeing often is I go into police departments where they have a pretty good manual, but it's up on a shelf and it's surrounded by gold-lined glass with a big sign on it that says, "Hey, break in case of litigation." And then you go out to the street and you ask the cops, "What are you doing?" And they say, "Yeah, we're doing whatever we want to do." Don't you know you have a policy on the subject? Yeah, but that policy, that's management. We don't really care what management gives us. Reality is we're going to do it the way we want to out here. And as you all know, that's going to cause some liability issues. All right. As you can see, I outlined, as it comes up on the screen, the fact that as we get up this ladder of liability, as you can imagine, we pay more cash. The officer not doing it correctly, we're going to pay some money. It's okay. Cops make mistakes. Firefighters make mistakes. Correction officers make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But we get to the level, and the question with the supervisors is, what did you know and when did you do it? What did you do about it? And the top level is the municipality. did you have a policy? Did you do the training? Did you enforce the policy? And did you discipline your employees when they didn't follow the policy? What does that all mean? Well, realistically, in the litigation world, the reason why we work on these policies is it's one key to the successful prevention of deliberate indifference. Deliberate indifference, inadequacy, so obvious and so likely to result in the violation of constitutional rights that the policymakers can reasonably be said to have been deliberately indifferent. What is that? Well, you know, it's a choice among various alternatives. Hey, administrators, if you're on the line, do you know that your policies aren't where they possibly could be? Maybe they're not bad, but you know what? Every one of us knows our policies can be updated. Here's the things I can't tolerate. Policies from the 70s and the 80s. Times have changed. Policies need to be updated. In fact, often based on how long the police chief has been there shows us where policies are. If a police chief's been there for a long time, he probably hasn't done much with the policies because things are going smoothly. Usually what I really like about my new police chiefs is that when they come on board, the first thing that they do is they come out and say, hey, I got to get my policies up to speed. I got to draw a line in the sand to separate the old regime from the new regime. And therefore, the first area is that. A knowing choice. A choice made with some knowledge or appreciation of what the consequences will or might be. Listen, when we're talking about use of force, that's simple. But if we sit here today and talk about hot topics, mental illness, bias-based policing, investigatory stops, electronic control weapons, ADA regulations, off-duty conduct, all of these areas are areas where I would say to you, you got a policy on that? Why? Because if you look around the country, our agencies are taking a beating right now because of it. So what do we do to address it? So now let's talk about some language.
Eric, real quick, one of the questions on that topic where you just talked about the high-frequency issues is what would you consider to be too much remedial training in a high-liability topic like firearm qualifications or use of force?
Well, that's a tough one because in respect of there's no standards to say, you know, there are standards when it comes to tactical operation. You know, there's 16 hours a month in there all the way. We do have post standards or whatever governs your certification standards in different parts of the country. All I care about in agencies that don't have those standards is, you know, there are some things that I look at my police chiefs and say, hey, every year we got to have, you know, whether you qualify, you know, well, first of all, you got to qualify at least once a year. Would I like to see you qualify twice a year? Yes. Do some agencies qualify 4 times a year? Yes. Are you bad if you don't? No. But no matter, you know, we have to have some level of qualifications. The problem is that I'd like you to look around the state and say, how's everybody else doing this? Reality is the more you can do it, the better you are. The more you can review your force policy with your officers, the more you can have them show proficiency with the weapons, the more protection you might have, and realistically, you have a better trained police force. But the question comes down to budgeting. So it's difficult, and I don't want to be the guy to say, oh, you need to do it X number of times. Well, you need to do it at least once. I'd like to see it more. I think the more you do it, the better the defense that I would have in that process. All right, so what is an unconstitutional policy? Well, under Monell liability, one of the things that are argued in attempting to identify litigation, I'm a little behind in my time, so I may get a little faster here, but is the court's analysis, a plaintiff who sues you, one of their topics is going to be that you had an unconstitutional policy. What does that mean? Well, in order to prove an unconstitutional policy, some of the language from court cases, one out of Maryland, Kane versus Rock, says the plaintiff could establish liability by providing that the alleged unconstitutional actions resulted from the execution of a formal policy statement, ordinance, or regulation officially adopted by the municipality. It's an a case out of the 8th Circuit in 1999, a case called Mettler, M-E-T-T-L-E-R, versus White Lodge or Whitledge, says the official policy is easily discernible. It's usually found in written policy statements, ordinance, or regulation. In fact, as the screen changes, you will see that a policy is an official policy, a deliberate choice of a guiding principle or procedure made by the municipal official who has the final authority regarding such matters. Now, I want you to look at this in two ways, because I also have to flip it on its head a little bit, and that is, the question I get often is, hey, Eric, is not updating your policies a policy procedure? And the answer is yes. If you're still running with an electronic control weapon policy from 10 years ago, I guarantee you you're missing some of the court rulings, manufacturer's warnings, or new standards that have come out in the past 5 years. And sometimes one of the arguments made by real good plaintiffs' attorneys is, hey, what do you know about what's going on across the country, and wouldn't it have benefited you to update your policy? And by not updating your policy or not training your officers on the new policy, isn't that in and of itself a policy statement? One of the things that I have also seen used in this situation is when an entity such as your Board of Finance or your town council provides to give you money to do the training or update the policy. The other question that a good plaintiff's attorney might ask is, hey, wait, isn't that a policy statement too? Isn't the fact that you didn't do it a decision made by the entity who has policy-making authority? So you can turn it both ways on both sides of the coin. So what's the mantra that I want you to take out of this? Well, I want you to develop sound policies based upon professional thinking, court decisions, and statutes. And I want to give you what that is, because to this point, we're talking about it in theory. The goal of police officers, as Chief Reynolds will always tell you, provide officers with the direction and guidance necessary to improve and develop as police officers and to identify, correct, and prevent officer misconduct. We want to clarify it. Reality is this. While you have a policy manual which is 4.5 inches thick, how many of those policies are your high-risk, high-liability policies? And often agencies look at this and go, oh, I know I got to update my policy, but you know what, Eric, I just don't want to do it. There's so many of them. Well, let's just start simple then. Start with the ones we end up in the courtroom all the time for. Use of force, weapons, officer-involved shootings, pursuits, bias-based policing, sexual harassment. Those type of policies are what I call high liability, high frequency policies. All right, let's move to the next step. One of the things I want you to be aware of, just so that you understand a little bit more of the push, is that in 1994, the Department of Justice passed this thing called the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994. Better known as 42 U.S.C. 14141. The authority of this gives the federal government the opportunity and the ability to investigate pattern and practice violations of police departments. If you've ever been to any of my training, and this training program doesn't give me the basis and the time I need to really dive into it, but I just want to make sure you're aware of there's another area of inconsistency that the federal government has taken a review of. The statute, which I'd like to say is more than what's on the screen, unfortunately it's not. The statute says it's unlawful for state or local law enforcement officers to engage in a pattern or practice of conduct that deprives persons of rights protected by the Constitution or laws of the United States. Well, Eric, you're going to say, what does that mean? Well, the first part of it, because really in this setting, the only thing I can really deal with for you is the necessity to have professional police practices. And where does that come from? Well, the start of this, and the first thing DOJ is always going to ask when conducting a pattern and practice investigation is going to be, give us your policies, specifically policies on high liability, high frequency issues. The mentality the Department of Justice has put in place, and under the Obama administration, as you know, if you just paid attention to any of the things that I put out to you across the country, either in my newsletter or on my blogs or my social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you will know that there's a lot of investigations going on. Now understand one thing, everybody. I'm not sitting here saying that what's occurring by investigations of police departments by DOJ, that's a bad thing. I'm not a police apologist in any sense of the word. And so the issue is this: what is this entity doing to our agencies? Well, my opinion is they're limiting inconsistencies. Why? Well, if I was to tell you the multiple consent decrees or agreements for effective and constitutional policing across the country are similar in nature, in that you should use them in part of your practice of ensuring that you're meeting the constitutional standards of your policies, that would basically tell you that the Department of Justice is saying, either get on board and become consistent, or we're going to force you to become consistent by using the standards by the authority given to us and suing you in court. DOJ says in their philosophy is that police practices that are endorsed by credible professional police organizations and are generally accepted wide practices used in a wide variety of competent police departments. In fact, one of the first areas of consent decree across the country was Steubenville, Ohio. And in 1998, the auditor who issued a ruling said an area which has provided guidance to the rest of us since then. And it says, the provisions of a decree are consistent with prevailing police practices and standards within the United States. Therefore, they serve as a guide to assist the city, municipality, the entity with the development of policies, practices, and procedures that are consistent with contemporary policing requirements. In that regard, one of the tools that I'm going to give you is, and as you'll see the new screen come up, and I'm actually going to try this. Stay with me. There's a high technology going on here. I'm actually going to link to the internet. And let's see if that worked, Tim. I think so. You still with me, Tim, or did you take a day off?
Yes, it is. No, it worked. Yep. You're there.
All right, perfect. So what I've clicked on here is the Department of Justice website, and you can see, and I encourage you all to go poke around this and look around. This is the special litigation section, exactly more focused. This is the conduct of law enforcement section in the Department of Justice website. There are some really good explanations of things that you should use in your policies. For example, the Crime and Control Safe Streets Act and the Title VII Civil Rights Act, or the Title VI Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then as you go down the bottom, there are some very documents that you can use, such as guidance, principles for promoting police integrity, and guidance regarding the use of race by federal law enforcement agencies. But most importantly, I want you to focus on cases and matters, because what you're going to see when I click on this are agencies in which Department of Justice has a current investigation and or a consent decree. This one page has a ton of valuable resources for you in your policy development, whether it's a consent decree or things such as the one here in Maryland, the Garcia letter, or the Sharp versus Baltimore letter. The one reason I like that is that it's a specific letter to recording of police officers and recommendations on how officers should be seizing cell phones from individuals. You will see a lot of technical letters, very interesting, Miami on their officer-involved shootings. Puerto Rico is the latest negotiated settlement, which is a very detailed. Seattle, as you'll see, and I'm sorry, I don't know what it looks like as I'm scrolling through, but you should pay attention to the Floyd case on the stop and search up in New York, and more importantly, things that have gone on around the country. But I'm going to focus. Okay, I'm going to focus on an easier one to look at. And I guess if you can't pick on yourself, you can't pick on anybody. The state of Connecticut and the East Haven Police Department I recommend that every one of you read a findings letter and the settlement. And what I did, because I don't want to worry about that, is I put a settlement up on the screen for you. And Tim, let me know that that's come through, please.
It has.
Okay. This is called a Agreement for Effective and Constitutional Policing. And when you're doing your policy, one of the things I want you to do as I scroll and you all get seasick, but I'm going to go down to the bottom, I want you to do, if nothing else, to take this and compare it to your policies. For example, you'll see it's very consistent, and I'm sorry, I'm almost done scrolling, consistent to areas of accreditation, and you'll see it starts with policies and training. It talks about policy development and implementation, but I'm slowly going to get to the first area where I'm going to stop and show you, which will be pick a section in which that whole area we've scrolled down is supervision, but let's just go to bias-based policing. Well, they're going to spend Section 5 talking about bias-based policing and what East Haven should have in their policies and training. You're going to see the same thing for use of force, for internal affairs, for stops and searches. And again, are you all bound by this? No, you're not at all. But is it something you should be looking at to see how far off you are? And the answer, in my opinion, is yes, it is. And I would recommend that you take either this one, because it's easy to read, Puerto Rico's, Seattle's, New Orleans, and just compare it to what you got going on. Now, I'm going to try with a control tab and see if I can get that to work. It's not working for me, of course, but I'm going to go back to this. And let's start with now, as my last 15 minutes as I'm going. We've got about 10 minutes left here, just so you know. All right, so I might be a little short, but let's see what's going on here. So first, I broke this down into my next step, which is, okay, Eric, listen, tell me what to do with policies and how to do it. Well, let's start with the first step, which are organizations. I got to tell you, one of the things that frustrates me the most in police departments is when I come into an agency and I ask these questions. What guides your agency? And often you hand me general orders, policies, SOPs, rules and regulations, directives, training bulletins, police memos. And I just kind of look at you and go, why do you have so many? And you look at me and go, I don't know. We've always had so many. And the question is if you get tired telling me about all those, do you think your officers are actually reading all those? And I guarantee you they're not. So one of the things, and I think the reason why we have all those is because early in litigation we thought we were smart. What does that mean? Well, a plaintiff's attorney would say, oh, produce the policies and procedures. And we'd say, sure, we'll be happy to, because those aren't going to tell you anything. What really runs our department is general orders. What I want to see happening in law enforcement is it's time to start condensing these things together. It's time to make it's still going to be a pretty good guide. My average manual that we use as the template in law enforcement guiding is probably about anywhere from 100 to 110 policies. So you're still going to have a lot of policies, but is there a way that we can streamline it a little bit better and not have all of these things? So first step, organization. Come up with a process of how you're going to do it. Second step, policy topics. I find it interesting when you look online at policies or you go into policy departments, the one thing that I'm cautious on, I guess this is the attorney side in me, is I look at agencies and go, why do you have a policy on that? Well, we thought maybe we should have a policy on that. But then we don't have policies on important ones. Policies are developed basically in looking ahead. Their policy or provide guidance on specific areas on officers to address. Now, I got to tell you, this is something that even I'm the vice chair of the legal officer section for IACP, and there are still times where I'm a little critical of the policies that IACP produces and model. You've seen some knee-jerk reactions occur. You know, the social networking policy. Do we need a social networking policy? Yeah, I think we do, because we don't want our cops uploading dead bodies on Facebook page. But the reality is, do we need all of the stuff that they have? then I think we can have some good conversations about that. So make sure we're having a policy. One of the things that I've gotten a lot of conversations with people, which is a hot topic, is, Eric, do I need a policy on active shooter? I'm a little concerned about having policies about active shooters. Why? Well, what happens in litigation? And what happens in an active shooter? It never goes the way we want it to plan out to go. And you know what? I got to give my cops some wiggle room so that they can handle the mess that they just walked into. And therefore, if I have a very strict policy on that tactic, doesn't that cause me problems? Don't we give a plaintiff's attorney something to argue about? Now, can we have training? Yes. Might we have an SOP? Maybe. But these are type topics that we talk about. A well-written policy and procedure manual serves as a foundation of a professional law enforcement agency. In fact, everybody, when Department of Justice or when I come to do an operational study of your agency, we all ask for the same thing first, and that is, give me a policy, give me your policy manual. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to compare it to key cases in the area. We're going to compare it to model policies, and we're going to compare it to consent decrees to ensure that at least on a baseline we have the necessary areas covered. Step 3, policy structure. And this might be my type A personality. It might be my staff's ability to pull their hair out. But the reality is just this. If we're going to do a policy manual, can we make it look professional? The first thing I tell every department is pick a template. Make a template. Make it the agency's template. Make it a solid template that looks good and professional. And then once we make a template, make sure every policy goes into the template. I know it's a little picky, but do me a favor. It looks bad in litigation when one policy is in aerial and next is in Kazakhstan's or all sorts of different. Pick a font, pick a size, ensure consistency. Make them all look the same. Also, indexing. Make sure when you're indexing, and nowadays we use a lot of, and every agency can do this. You know, it costs $600 maybe to buy a PDF program, but you can index in your PDFs, search by topics, by keywords. You know, we are now an entity in which we like to find things quickly, and therefore we don't have a lot of patience in that area. We want our cops and our supervisors, and that's one of the reasons why we love PowerDMS, is if you put the right information into your search tools and your keyword searches, you know, and all of you spend so much time on the phone with Sandy, she can tell you exactly, you know, what the key areas are, and you know, look through a policy, put some keywords in there. Now a cop or a supervisor can search that keyword and get the policy that addresses. Try and make it a little easier for all of us. Technology, while sometimes it's not a good thing, we need to make it a good thing.
Hey, Eric, real quick, 2 things. I know you got a couple more slides, but is there a classroom-style training? Is there a classroom-style training program that you recommend for policy writing, from format, style, or topics?
For policy writing?
Yeah, like someone's asking if there are kind of recommended.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I don't know. I've never seen anyone but myself do it. It is painful. It's not one of those. It's a difficult classroom, so I don't have anybody to recommend. But if that person who's looking for that is interested offline, there are a couple of entities out there that I do work with, and maybe we can find them someone with some, you know, that can provide that type of training.
So in good lawyer fashion, you've got 3 minutes to close your case.
You know I'm good at that, and you know I'll never make 3 minutes. So
we'll go a little late. I'm just going to let people know. I apologize if we extend over a little bit. If you can stay on, that's great.
Won't be that long. Only a couple more slides. So
okay.
All right. Structure. Structure in policies, I think, is very important because you know, while making a policy look good, I got to go back to my mentor, Charlie Reynolds. You want to see somebody get upset when we look at a policy and all of a sudden we're at a project and you know, you can't make rhyme or reason in the policy where to find certain things. Recommendations that I use in my policies, purpose statements, policy statements, Purpose statement. What's the policy about? Policy statement. What's the policy statement of the agency specific to the topic? Definitions. And I think definitions are very important. I often read through policies and see words, well, that you can have multiple definitions for. One of the things I recommend is make definitions. Why? Because it's less to argue about in court later. You know, you could be wrong, but the reality is if we're going to argue about a word, I would like to have the word qualified for the officers. The other thing that I've seen agencies do, which is great, is when you're done with all of your policies, take all of your definitions out of your policies and make a little dictionary of definitions to allow officers to know what your policy means on these certain things. The next section is procedures. Very simple. I always say allowed conduct, prohibited conduct, and reporting requirements. I want an officer to know where he has to go in a policy to look for what he's allowed to do, to look for what he's not allowed to do, and to look for, after he does it, what should he be doing. The last portion of a policy structure is supervision and training requirements. What is the training requirement as to use of force for your officers? How many? We're going to put this in policy. Why? Well, I need you to do it at least 4 hours a year or whatever it's going to be, especially when you get to your weapons and recertification. You know, the manufacturer has some set standards. Well, if a manufacturer has set standards, we got to make them policy because we have to follow them. Supervision requirements. What do I expect the supervisor to do when the policy is activated? Step 4. So what should I use to identify professional police practices? Please do me a favor. Stop using the bad stuff. You know, the reality of what frustrates me is that often when I ask departments, where'd you get this? Well, I just pulled it off the internet. Love the internet. I don't know if I love it for policy development, though. The reality is Americans for Effective Law Enforcement on the bottom of their front page, which is AELE.org, Alpha Echo Lincoln Echo.org, has about 40-something policy manuals. Some of them might be good. Some of them might be bad. You can Google police departments, find their policy manuals. Do me a favor and use this standard. Make sure the agency you use to copy or to plagiarize at least is then under some sort of analysis. Whether it's they got a good expert or they've got a lot of litigation or they're under a consent decree, just make sure that somebody and a bunch of people have attacked them. I got to tell you, and nothing to put out for IACP Net because they don't say that everything in there is good, but I got to tell you, there's a lot of garbage out there. People produce policies and they upload their policies to say, hey, my policy is the model. Well, it's not that good, so it shouldn't be the model. Be careful. What are things that you look for? Obviously, your state statutes cover. State and CLIA accreditations, those are something to use in policy drafting. Consent decrees, agreements through Department of Justice, those are something to use because they've been time-tested and mother-approved. Manufacturer's warnings on electronic control weapons, specific equipment, firearms. If they say we can't do it or they don't want you to do it, you better put it in the policy or we're going to be bound by it. Model policies, IACP, PERF, local or state post, therefore might be a governing place. Contemporary research, having a lawyer go online and see what's going on in your neck of the area, which is something that I think is really important. We do it for every agency that we deal with, is somebody's got to look and see what the court's saying about that topic. And then contemporary research related to policing, and there's a lot of it out there. Americans for Effective Law Enforcement has a great free database on topics in law enforcement, and they summarize by section case law out of Circuit Court of Appeals which govern that. In fact, I don't think there's any better repository, just not because I'm on the board of directors there, but because it's really a labor of love. It was done so that you all would be easy to find the documents and the cases and letters and articles on the subjects, and therefore the unfortunate thing that we get upset about is that guess who uses it the most? plaintiff's attorneys use it the most, where we should be using it the most. So check that out, Americans for Effective Law Enforcement, Alpha Echo Lincoln Echo, for you non-military people, AELE.org. Great libraries. There's an electronic control weapon library on there that has all the case law broke down by Circuit Court of Appeals. Really, really good research. And step 5, the last step, review. I'm a strong believer, as I hit my mark here, that more importantly, policies need to work for departments. So how do we make them work? The first thing I do in every department that we work with is we put together what's called a policy review committee. What is that? Well, again, the more people, the more confusion. The one unfortunate thing about law enforcement is often, and maybe this is in all areas, a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and sometimes some of them aren't good, or they have no basis for it. That kind of, this is the way we do it here mentality. We use a policy review committee in order to get people to look at how we're going to make this policy work in the agency. Also, more importantly, if you're a strong union area, you want to pull these people in early before, you make things to argue about, because we could discuss a lot of the things that are here, but the reality is, in the end, the CEO is going to make a decision, and they might not like it, but I think that they're more respected, and they respect the process more when I give them the opportunity to tell me why they don't like it. Utilizing your subject matter experts. In your department, you all have subject matter experts. Your DT instructors, your specialists. Well, you know what? You got to call them. You got to let them see the policy. You got to let them comment on it, because if they're the experts and they're required to enforce the department, when you issue that policy, who do you think the first one the troops are going to go to is? That person. And then legal advisor, they got to be reviewed. And they got to be reviewed by people who know what they're doing. Not every attorney is an expert in law enforcement review. Here, reality, I don't know how to close your house. And thank God for people in my office, they can write the will. But reality is, what I do is I know what that looks like when it gets in the courtroom. And I know what it's going to taste like when it gets into the courtroom. And I know how we're going to give snouts and protection. So whether it's me or a bunch of other attorneys, and you might have them on staff or at your town, a lot of experience, just make sure the legal advisor you use has the basis for what's there. I put on this last slide here, and I think that you're going to be able to produce, I think Tim will send out to everybody this PowerPoint, because you can have it. But there's links to a bunch of different areas, documents, things that you can use or give to your policy developer that can help build up the basis of their knowledge on policy writing, whether it's the IACP documents, the best practices, the accreditation documents, the writing policy manual articles, those type of things. And finally, where are we going to go from here? Well, in order to give you the best, and yes, can you believe it, an hour of attorney time for $35. Isn't that a damn deal? The reality is this. We're going to spend the next couple of months to see how this goes, but the one thing that I would like to do for you is I would like to have a webinar, 1 hour webinar on a specific topic. So we're going to try this out. June 19th, we're going to do our first one on general use of force. I'm going to do a couple things for you. We're going to review what I consider to be my model policy. I'm going to give you a copy of my model policy if you are a member of the training program, and hopefully that will assist you in developing it if you don't have the ability or the finances to get somebody on board to do that. Some of the topics that we look for in the future is internal affairs on July 31st, weapon policies on the 21st, which means we'll discuss chemical agent, impact weapons, electronic control weapons, and maybe some firearms. But as you can imagine, there's so much of that that we got to do it in 2 separate series, one on the 21st, one on the 18th. So the way that we're doing this is very simply in PowerDMS. I'll turn this over to you, Tim, in a couple minutes. Is you can buy the 1 series, you can buy all the series. If this goes well, and you guys like this type of content, we will be doing it on a topic per series over the next year or so, and then we'll reevaluate. So this is basically fed off of you. If you think what we have to say is valuable and will help you, then we've done what we need to. The reality here is that. So I'm honored on behalf of Daigle Law Group and our consultants that work for us. I'm honored that we were able to put this together for you. I thank you for spending an hour with me and us. I honor our relationship with PowerDMS. I think it's a valuable tool. And Tim, with that, I turn this back over to you.
First of all, Eric, I thank you, and thank you for those attendees that have extended over this day. I think you're going to get more than an hour next time. I think we're going to actually do like a 90-minute or less, or give you a little bit more time for that $35.
Yeah,
you're going to get Eric cheaper. The thing is, we'll be sending an email on this. It's really to help Eric can cover his costs for his time from how it goes for this. And we actually sponsor Eric at different events. The next one coming up is at CAMA for corrections. So if you're attending that, Eric actually is doing a session on 6 hours or 5 hours on one of the topics, and it usually goes pretty well.
Yeah, we just did a session for you guys in Pennsylvania with accreditation. Went really well.
Yeah, and then what I would say is you will be getting an email from us with the recording, with the presentation, and the links. It usually comes out within about a week. We have to go through the audio, make sure everything's clear, make sure the links are working, so you'll get that from us. Many of you asked questions that I didn't get to Eric, but he will be getting a copy of that, and I'll be making sure he follows up individually.
And if people are dropped, you don't want to stay.
Yeah, let me do a question here, Eric. The one question I want to make sure is you asked me to bring back is the use of force continuum.
Okay, yes, perfect.
Yep.
All right, so here's my thoughts on the continuum. Basically what happened is I have never been a continuum fan because it's really only a plaintiff's tool that uses against us in litigation. You know, they blow it up into a big, an ease, put it on an easel, make it a big board, and they really just use it to confuse the jury. So for many years, I am a very strong fan of constitutional-based policing, and therefore I've been fighting as hard as I can with the help of people that are much more connected than I am to fight this. Unfortunately, it wasn't until 2012 that I could actually say to my clients, I think you can now get rid of the continuum. And the reason was because Department of Justice still required it in consent decrees and federal requirements across the country. And so I was putting my clients in harm's way if I told them, hey, take it out, but, you might be harmed. In the 2012 consent decrees, there were 5 of them, East Haven, Seattle, New Orleans, Warren, Ohio, and Puerto Rico. The Department of Justice removed the consent decree. So instead of doing, the feds do it this way, and that is they're not going to come out and tell you, okay, I give you permission, we're just not going to talk about it, and that's all I needed to say, hey, get rid of it out of your continuum. What do I put in its place? Graham versus Connor, Tennessee versus Garner, Fourth Amendment application standard, the severity of the crime, threat to the officer, the active resistance or attempting to evade response model and methodology that we'll talk about in the first webinar. More importantly, in your training aspect, and I strongly recommend an entity that I use in my use of force training program, Jim Marker in Wyoming, out there. They do a fabulous job with this constitutional-based policing because they can control it by the state. They've changed their whole training module and the way they do it, and I find it very impressive. I think it's one of the best in the countries. LAPD has done it, San Jose, FLETC has done it. The problem when you get into the federal side, while FLETC does a great job of preparing our use of force instructors, the federal thought process versus the local 1983 action sometimes misses the boat, but for the most part, anything that you move towards that direction is good.
Two more questions, Eric. One's more of a statement. So the people who are interested in the follow-up webinars, they're asking if it's going to be possible to get a certificate of training for those in attendance, something like this or the other webinars. I think it's a great idea.
I think we should do that for this one, and maybe I can just throw it together and then we can send a certificate out because everybody likes to prove that they've received some training somewhere else. So, Tim, if you're okay with that, I think
yeah, I'm totally okay. Why don't you? I'll work with you and Jillian and get that together and make sure that's part of the follow-up as well. The other question is, our agency has policies and a larger collection of SOPs broken down by division. We have an ongoing discussion. Does a policy serve different purpose than a standard operating procedure? It seems an SOP is more of a detailed how-to. Is it fair to say a policy instructs what to do and an SOP instructs how to do it?
Yes, I will say that was how I would classify it. Would be, and I look at, and I'm very cautious on my SOPs, but there's things that we need, like an SOP is it is a more of a guiding, more detail-oriented, and is necessary. So you might have a policy on tactical operation, such as when to activate, who to activate, who's going to do what, where, and why. But you might have an SOP on, selection and training and care for equipment and those types of things. Excuse me. So while I don't want you to go crazy with those SOPs, because you got to make sure very clear that there is not inconsistency between the two. I like SOPs and I've actually tried to start moving my SOPs over to policies. That makes them a little longer, but I try to find, like criminal investigation, evidence collection. What do I need in a policy, and what do I need in SOP, and can I find a happy medium? So I do agree that most agencies, whether you call it a general order, a policy, a procedure, a directive, that's great. That should be one portion. I do say that a lot of times in a lot of police departments, I use rules and regulations as very specific items that are responsive to collective bargaining, to provide guidance on issues that may not need a whole policy. So you can have rules and regulations, and in some areas we have SOPs. But those of you that know what I'm talking about know there's just agencies that got everything. And, and I look at them and go, I can guarantee you, if I have a litigation about this topic, what are you going to give me? What's the guiding principle? And sometimes agencies themselves don't know.
Okay, last question. Let me find it. Sorry. Okay, the last question was.
Sorry.
Now, regarding definitions, did Eric say that once the policy is done, take out the definitions from the policy and do a separate dictionary? They were just trying to understand your point.
Yeah. Well, no, what I said is, and I don't say you have to do this in any sense of the word, but some departments, which I find pretty interesting sometimes, is, every policy is going to have a definition section. And I've seen a handful of departments who, at the end, just while they keep it in the policy, but in the end they collected all the definitions and kind of made like a little dictionary. And because they could search it by term, and then basically in the dictionary, you have a term, and you might have a link on the term to bring you right to the policies which has those terms. Obviously, you're getting way more technical than I'm capable of, but the reality is that's something I've seen done, and I find it pretty interesting. It might be the future of making it so that an officer can identify very quickly what we mean by a term and where to find it in the policy.
Well, great. Well,
right.
Go ahead.
You can do that there, right, Tim?
Yes. Yes, you can do that within PowerDMS.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to extend the thanks out from PowerDMS to Eric. This was something we wanted to try. As I said, we partner with Eric around the country, and we have him at different events. And appreciate all those that stayed on for the entire time. It always amazes me, Eric is able to get people to stay on longer, especially when they're not paying for his time, which is good. So, again, this is recorded. You will be getting a copy of the recording. We're going to work on a certificate for this and the other ones. You'll get announcements on how to register for those as well. We appreciate everybody's time. And, Eric, I will follow up with you later today. I've got to run to another conference. Thank you very much.
All right, everybody be safe. God bless. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you.